HOA called my garden a threat, then stole it under cover of night. But what they took wasn't just compost, it was a time bomb wrapped in roots. Now vines are bursting through their clubhouse walls, and HOA funds are bleeding dry. I have the footage, the county has the proof. And the fine print, it says I was never under their control to begin with. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. I moved here for the quiet. After 30 years in the city, most of them spent as a landscape architect, dodging deadlines and designing green pieces no one truly appreciated, I finally traded skyscrapers for sunsets. The neighborhood was everything the realtor promised. Tree-lined streets, hydrangea hedges, smiling retirees, walking their golden retrievers. It was the kind of place where wind chimes sounded like a lullaby, and every driveway was pressure-washed into submission. I was ready to live simply, to breathe, to give back to the land. So I started a compost system in my backyard. Nothing extravagant, just 2 low-profile bins tucked near the fence, shaded by an old dogwood. I collected kitchen scraps, yard clippings, coffee grounds. Let it break down naturally, the way soil has always done when left to its own rhythm. The goal was modest: feed my soil, grow native pollinator plants, and maybe teach a few neighborhood kids how ecosystems worked. At first, no one said anything. A couple of curious glances over the fence. A nod from old Mr. Hargrove across the street. But then, about 3 weeks in, I got the first notice. Your property is in violation of Section 12B. Unapproved utility structures. Remove all unsightly bins immediately. I read it twice. Unsightly? The bins were green. Lidded. Clean. I'd seen worse on garbage day. I filed a polite email asking for clarification. A week later, I received a second notice. This one with a red border. Ongoing violation. Presence of decomposing materials. Odors reported. Please cease and desist. I walked out to the bins, cracked one open, and inhaled. Nothing but the warm, earthy scent of natural decomposition. If anything, it smelled like a forest floor after rain. I took pictures, noted the lack of odor, and mailed my response with documented proof. I was sure it was just a misunderstanding. But then the real problems started. My compost began disappearing. At first I thought it was an animal, maybe raccoons or possums digging through for banana peels. So I reinforced the lids and installed a motion light. But the pile still shrank overnight. Sometimes entire batches vanished. I started leaving chalk marks on the bin sides. They'd be wiped clean by morning. It wasn't until a particularly early walk just after dawn, coffee in hand, that I saw it. 2 people in HOA polos, backs to me, scooping my compost into black contractor bags. Not carefully, hurriedly. Like they were on a schedule. I ducked behind a hedge and watched as they loaded the bags into a white HOA maintenance truck, glanced around nervously, and drove off down the private road toward the community park. I followed at a distance. They parked near the ornamental flower beds by the tennis courts, unloaded the bags, poured the compost directly into the beds, then left. I stood behind a tree, stunned. It wasn't just theft. It was targeted. They weren't just taking my compost, they were using it. Quietly, secretly, while publicly condemning me for making it. I walked back home in a daze. My hands were shaking. I'd dealt with bureaucrats before, but this felt personal. I started digging, not in the soil, in the HOA meeting minutes. There it was, buried in the agenda from 2 months ago. Community landscaping budget reduced. Explore alternative soil amendment sources. The same week they issued my first violation. I realized what was happening. They didn't want to stop me. They wanted to control it, claim it, shame me into giving it up while quietly harvesting it for their own beautification projects. They thought I was just another quiet old guy with too much time and a shovel. But what they didn't realize, what no one ever suspects, is that people like me, the ones who spend decades learning how nature works, know exactly how to make it grow where it's not wanted. And if they were going to steal from me, they were going to learn what happens when you disturb the wrong kind of soil. This was war. And I already knew how it ended. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. At first it was just the glances. The way Mrs. Donnelly across the street paused before waving, then decided against it. Or how the couple from Lot 7 crossed the road entirely when I came out to collect my mail. One morning, I caught a teen on a scooter pointing at my yard, laughing. His mom yanked him away like I was contagious. Then came the real sting. A black trash bag tossed over my fence. I opened it, expecting litter. Instead, I found shredded food wrappers, half-eaten takeout, and a single sheet of paper, smeared with mustard. It read, in jagged Sharpie ink, "Move out, mulch man." I stood there, fingers clenched around the bag, heart thudding in disbelief. Somehow, I had become the villain, the nuisance, the neighborhood's dirty secret. I wasn't just a guy with compost bins anymore. I was an infestation. The next day, the first HOA bulletin hit inboxes. Dressed up in corporate serif and passive-aggressive phrasing. Residents are reminded to report any biohazard risks, including unregulated composting, vermin-attracting practices, or air quality concerns. We all want our neighborhood to remain safe, sanitary, and sellable. Sellable. There it was. The real fear, not health, not rodents. Property values. It wasn't long before I received a friendly visit from an HOA board member. Derek, a self-styled compliance officer, who looked like he'd been waiting for an excuse to wear a badge his whole life. He didn't step past the walkway. "Just checking in," he said, holding a clipboard like it was a shield. "There have been complaints. Multiple residents say they've seen rats near your yard." I asked him if any of them had proof. Photos. Tracks. Droppings. He shifted uncomfortably and mumbled something about multiple sources. Then he pulled out the real reason for his visit, a new rule proposal. Effective immediately, all compost bins must be pre-approved, enclosed, and compliant with aesthetic standards as outlined in Article 4, which sounded innocent until I read the fine print. The aesthetic standard required bins to be made of matching composite material, hidden from view, and placed no closer than 20 feet from any structure or fence. In other words, impossible for any normal backyard. And the kicker? The vote was scheduled for that evening. No notice. No time to appeal. So I showed up. I wore my cleanest button-down shirt, brought printed photos of my compost bins, outlined the ecological benefits of native plant cultivation. I had numbers, charts, even studies from the EPA. I was ready to make my case. But the second I stood up, the room turned ice cold. There were maybe 20 people in the room. 5 on the board. Catherine Elms sat at the center, sharp red blazer, airbrushed smile, and a pen tapping with precise annoyance. The moment I introduced myself, someone from the back muttered, "Oh great, the fertilizer guy." I kept speaking. I talked about soil regeneration, about community gardens, about how even the White House used compost. But halfway through, Catherine cut me off. "We're not here to debate fringe gardening practices," she said sweetly. "We're here to protect the integrity of our community." I blinked. "Fringe? Composting is—" She raised a hand. "Sir, we've had multiple complaints. Odors, pests, children afraid to play near your lot. There are rumors of maggots in your mulch." Maggots? I looked around the room. A few residents nodded. Most wouldn't meet my eyes. I tried to explain that healthy compost isn't a breeding ground for pests, that done right, it's a closed system. But she'd already moved on to a vote. 5 hands went up. Motion passed. Effective immediately, all compost bins without pre-approval would be fined $100 per day of non-compliance. And mine, of course, had never been submitted. Because when I moved in, there was no such rule. I left the meeting humiliated. No one spoke to me as I walked out. Even Derek avoided eye contact. By morning, I had a letter taped to my door. Notice of violation. $500 due. Second strike. And, just like that, they'd boxed me in. They'd stolen my compost. They'd slandered my name. Now they'd made it illegal for me to grow anything meaningful. But here's the thing. They never understood about people like me. About people who've spent their lives with soil under their nails and roots running deep through everything they love. You don't bury a gardener. You just give him a reason to dig deeper. And I had plenty of reasons now. It started with a strange glow in the dark. I couldn't sleep. The stress, the fines, the isolation, it clung to me like the humidity before a thunderstorm. So I walked, past midnight. The kind of hour where even the sprinklers go quiet and every porch light flickers like it's second-guessing itself. I took my usual loop around the neighborhood, head down, hands in my pockets. But as I neared the community clubhouse, the pride of the HOA, complete with faux columns and solar lighting, I saw something that made me stop cold. There were sprouts, dozens of them, maybe more. Little green shoots were pushing up from the mulch beds along the clubhouse's west wall, right where the siding met the soil. They weren't weeds, not crabgrass or dandelions. These were patterned, thick, vining, too organized to be random. And more importantly, they weren't part of any landscaping plan I'd ever seen. I crouched down, brushing a finger along one of the leaves. My breath caught. I recognized them. Pomoea purpura, wild morning glory. Hardy, beautiful, and to the untrained eye, harmless. But when left unchecked, a relentless, twining invader. The kind of plant that hugs until it strangles. The kind of plant that takes root in what you thought was solid. I hadn't planted it here, but I'd used it before. Years ago, I consulted on a restoration project along a storm-damaged shoreline in Louisiana. We'd dust a mix of aggressive native vines to prevent erosion. Morning Glory was one of them. I remembered the seed pods, tough as nails, dormant for months, but once disturbed, once composted, warmed, turned over, they activated fast. My compost. My stolen compost. They had dumped it here, right under their own feet. And now it was growing through their walls. I stood there in stunned silence. The siding cheap vinyl was already warping near the base. The roots had found a moisture pocket, probably from a poorly sealed sprinkler pipe. One vine had reached the window trim, curling upward like it was looking for sunlight that didn't exist. It was unintentional, accidental, poetic. They thought they were destroying my work. But all they'd done was move it, feed it, weaponize it, without even realizing. And suddenly, I saw the whole board like a chess set. Catherine, in her red blazer. Derek with his clipboard. The others nodding like bobbleheads while quietly dumping bags of living soil onto public land, clubhouse beds, ornamental gardens. Every time they moved my compost, they were sowing the seeds of their own undoing. And here's the irony. They couldn't even blame me. Not legally. The vines were native adjacent. Not classified as noxious. Not prohibited by HOA regulations. They were technically ornamental, just the kind that liked to spread. Aggressively. It was an accident. But what if it wasn't? I walked back home with something I hadn't felt in weeks. Clarity. They had drawn first blood, humiliated me, vilified me, stolen from me. And now, nature was answering. I opened my shed and dug out my old seed catalogs, the ones I hadn't touched since retirement. I made a list, not of plants for beauty but for tactical growth, the creepers, the spreaders, the bloomers that thrived on neglect. Dutchman's pipe, trumpet vine, bishop's weed, fast to root, hard to kill, legal, lethal, to siding and budget line items. This wasn't revenge, this was restoration, of balance, of dignity. And if they wanted to keep stealing from me, I would let them, gladly. But this time, every handful would come preloaded, because nature doesn't forget, and neither do I. War, it turns out, doesn't need fire. Sometimes it only needs roots. They thought they'd buried me under fines and gossip, turned me into a pariah. What they didn't realize was that in trying to erase me, they gave me perfect cover. No one looks twice at the man they've already dismissed. The mulch man became an afterthought. So I got to work quietly. I redesigned my compost batches with surgical precision, not the careless piles of lawn trimmings they expected. No, these were gift batches, tailored blends of fragrant citrus rinds, mint sprigs, basil stems, coffee grounds, apple cores. I made them rich, visually lush, aromatic, irresistible. And inside them, like a symphony played in a silent key, I embedded my instruments of reclamation. Dutchman's pipe, morning glory, bishop's weed. All technically legal. All native adjacent. all just barely inside the boundaries of HOA landscaping rules, so long as you weren't trying to get rid of them. That's the genius of plants. Once they're in the ground, you're no longer in control. They spread, they climb, they burrow deep into the foundations of everything artificial. I'd learned long ago that some seeds need fire to germinate. Others, pressure. What they'd done to me was pressure, and now they'd given me the perfect ecosystem to grow in. I timed my moves like a conductor. Late at night or early before dawn, I'd accidentally leave my compost bin slightly unsecured. Not enough to look intentional, just enough to make a thief's job easier. I left it where I knew the HOA maintenance crew would spot it during their early morning rounds. They took the bait. Every time. I even started filing anonymous complaints to the HOA hotline, using a voice changer app. Unapproved compost bin spotted on lot 18. Smells like rotting fruit. Definitely non-compliant. We've seen rats near the garden shed. You should relocate the compost ASAP. It worked better than I'd hoped. They came rushing in like rats themselves, snatching up my bins and dumping the contents across the neighborhood. In flower beds, around the tennis courts, even behind the tool shed, behind the pool fence. And then I watched and waited. A week later, the first signs appeared. A delicate vine curling around the base of a decorative lamppost. Unusual foliage sprouting between cracks in the sidewalk. A leafy tendril climbing the back gate of the clubhouse shed. I kept my distance, always casual, always unnoticed. But inside I tracked everything like a botanist with a clipboard. I knew the life cycles of each species I deployed. I knew when they'd bloom, when they'd spread, and exactly how long it would take before the HOA realized they had a problem they couldn't name, much less solve. They had no idea what was coming, because they were planting it. Week by week, the neighborhood began to change. Subtly at first, the landscaping crew doubled their visits, hacking at vines that came back faster every time. They pressure-washed bricks that were now pockmarked by spreading roots. They replaced mulch again and again, never realizing that each replacement carried more seeds. Because once these plants take hold, pulling them only helps them spread. Cut a vine, and 5 more shoot out. Move a root, and it anchors deeper. Every attempt to fix it only made it worse. I overheard Derek on his phone outside the mail kiosk. I swear it's like the landscaping is haunted. The more we clean it, the weirder it grows. I smiled, but I wasn't done. This was never about weeds. It was about principle. They'd tried to erase what they didn't understand. They'd mistaken silence for surrender. And now, they were tending the very revolution they tried to crush. The vines weren't just surviving. They were flourishing. In the gutters, up the fence lines, inside the forgotten crevices of their perfect plastic kingdom. I wasn't just reclaiming the soil, I was reclaiming control. And the best part, they still hadn't figured out the source. Not yet, but they would, because I was just getting started. It didn't happen all at once. Like all great takeovers, it began subtly, a blossom here, a root there, creeping up unnoticed until it was everywhere. The first real breach came through the west wall of the community clubhouse. It started with a hairline crack, just a subtle bulge in the drywall behind the vending machine. Then came the discoloration. Then the smell. A soft, earthy perfume of damp soil and wildflowers. Not unpleasant, just uninvited. When they finally pulled the paneling back, the maintenance team found a latticework of roots, thick and tangled, snaking along wiring conduits and HVAC vents like a living nervous system. That's when they realized the building was being swallowed. Dutchman's pipe had crept through the gutters. Morning glory had scaled the security camera poles, its blooms haloing the lenses in violet coronas. Bishop's weed, defiant and spreading, pushed through sidewalk seams like fingers testing for weakness. It was beautiful, and it was everywhere. The landscaping crew tried their best. They trimmed, they sprayed, they dug, then they quit. The HOA brought in private contractors. One walked off the job laughing, muttering something about nature's revenge. Another gave a quote so high Catherine nearly choked reading it aloud. HOA funds started bleeding. Thousands redirected to emergency landscaping. But no matter what they did, the plants returned faster than before. They had no idea that the more they uprooted, the more aggressively the rhizomes spread. They were fighting nature with scissors. And nature was winning. Catherine tried to spin it, claimed the HOA was undergoing an eco-enhancement transition. But real estate agents started avoiding the neighborhood. Her open houses, once polished to Stepford perfection, were rescheduled, then canceled altogether. Prospective buyers wouldn't get out of their cars. "Looks overgrown," one said as he rolled down the window. "Like a forest trying to take it back." It was. Meanwhile, I kept to myself. Watered my native pollinators. Trimmed my lavender. Waved to the neighbors who still looked my way. And every few days, like clockwork, I left my compost bin just slightly too close to the curb. They couldn't help themselves. Even in chaos, they still thought they were punishing me by stealing my nuisance soil. They took batch after batch, unknowingly distributing my seed-laced offerings into every corner of their manicured domain. But now they were getting desperate. Cameras went up. Hidden ones tucked into birdhouses, under eaves, even inside the Holocaust soffit vents. They were convinced this was human sabotage, that someone was sneaking in at night, planting invasive species by hand. They were half right. They caught raccoons, a few deer, a teenager skateboarding after hours. But no masked saboteur, no smoking gun, just footage of me, every now and then tending my compost pile, sometimes carrying a trowel, sometimes just turning the soil. All perfectly legal. Until the day I turned the tables. I'd noticed something odd during one of my early morning walks. A white HOA pickup parked just off the private trail leading to the park. Inside, 2 board members in branded polos, shoveling compost from my unlocked bin into bags, like always. But this time, I was ready. Phone in hand, lens focused, date stamped, time stamped, high-definition footage. And better still, I'd checked the local codes the night before. Transporting unlicensed compost to public land, without municipal approval, violated 3 county-level environmental regulations. One of them came with a 5-figure fine. I smiled as I stopped recording. Let them check their cameras. Let them scan every frame. They would never find a masked eco-terrorist. Because the truth was worse. There was no saboteur, only compost. Only vines. Only the consequence of their own hands. And I was just the gardener. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to knock on doors or leave anonymous notes. I just needed one form, one upload, and the truth. See, they thought I'd stay on the defensive forever, dodging fines, patching reputation wounds, licking the compost from my wounds. But the thing about people who understand systems, natural or bureaucratic, is that we learn how to survive in silence. And when we strike clean. I uploaded the footage, no embellishments, no dramatic music or editing, just a simple, time-stamped video of 2 HOA board members hauling unauthorized compost into a city-maintained wildland buffer. Public land. Not theirs. Never theirs. The County Environmental Compliance Office doesn't have a flashy name, but it does have teeth. A soft-posen analyst named Rogers called me a few days later. "We've received your report. Are you available for follow-up?" I kept my voice steady. Always. 2 weeks later, an unmarked white truck rolled into the neighborhood. No sirens. No spectacle. Just a logo on the side door. Faded and Governmental County Division of Environmental Quality. 2 inspectors got out, clipboards, measuring kits, soil probes, a digital FLIR scanner for root density mapping. They didn't knock. They didn't ask permission. They just started working. They measured saturation levels in the turf behind the clubhouse, took stem clippings, mapped vine spread vectors, took runoff samples near the storm drains. Every footstep they took was methodical, legal, documented. Within 30 minutes, one of the inspectors stood staring up at the siding where vines had warped the aluminum frame. He turned to the other. Structural encroachment. Root breach, possibly into the foundation. I watched from across the street, pruning my salvia. Later that afternoon, Catherine arrived in her usual flurry of sunglasses, Bluetooth earpiece, and clipped heels. She marched right up to the lead inspector and launched into performance mode. "This is clearly an act of vandalism. Someone planted these invasives to destroy our property. We've been targeted. I demand you open a criminal investigation." The inspector, a man in his 50s with sun-worn skin and a county badge clipped his vest, held up a form. "We have the HOA landscaping logs. You installed this bed 4 months ago." Catherine paused. "Only because we had no choice, residents were complaining about." "Doesn't matter. You moved unprocessed compost onto protected public land. That constitutes environmental negligence under County Ordinance 14.6, Section B." Then came the smile. The calm, professional kind that carries weight. "You understand this may result in structural condemnation and civil penalties, correct?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. By the end of the week, the fallout had started. A quiet memo circulated at first, just among the board. Then it leaked. The county was recommending temporary closure of the HOA clubhouse, pending further soil analysis. All HOA expenditures were frozen under audit. The emergency landscaping fund gone. Operating budget suspended. They tried to hold an emergency meeting at the local library. Only 6 people showed up. No one wanted to be seen sitting near Catherine. And me? I stayed silent. I stayed polite, because everything I needed to say was already growing under their feet. I didn't scream. I didn't vandalize. I didn't break a single rule. I just let them carry my seeds and their own downfall right to their doorstep. It arrived on a Tuesday, rolled and rubber-banded like any other flyer, but heavier, full-color cardstock, glossy finish. Someone had slipped a copy onto every porch, every mailbox, every windshield within 3 blocks. The title was bold, serifed, and impossible to ignore. "The Root of the Problem, a Breakdown of HOA Hypocrisy." I opened mine slowly. Page 1. A side-by-side one photo of my compost bins, clean, labeled, professionally built. The second, a grainy still from the HOA's own maintenance crew dumping my stolen soil behind the clubhouse. Page 2, a timeline, neatly laid out, violation notices, fake complaints, landscaping costs, all aligned to the dates of compost relocation. Red arrows traced the spread of vines like a wildfire map. Page 3, screenshots from county environmental filings. Catherine's signature next to line items like Emerisham sod budget, $4,800, and invasive mitigation consultant. Meanwhile, member amenities had been slashed, pool hours reduced, community events canceled, sidewalk lighting repairs deferred. And on the final page, "If your dues are funding sabotage cover-ups instead of community improvements, is this still your HOA?" No one claimed authorship, no watermark, no return address. Just a URL to a Dropbox folder titled, "Transparency Begins Here." By noon, the neighborhood group chat was on fire. "Did you know they spent 14 KLs on vines but cut the park cleanup budget?" Wait, did Catherine really install the bed that broke the foundation? I thought that guy was just a weird garden nerd. I stayed silent. Sat on my porch, trimming basil, pretending not to hear the whirlpool of reckoning swirling just beyond my fence. But I watched. Oh, I watched. That night, 3 board members resigned. Publicly. One posted a note to their door that read, "I joined to improve the community, not fund a cover-up. I won't be part of this anymore." Catherine tried damage control. She called an emergency meeting in the recreation hall. What was left of it, the building already bore yellow tape across the baseboards. A temporary closure sign in the window. 6 people showed up. She stood behind a plastic folding table, voice cracking through a borrowed megaphone, trying to explain, justify, redirect. But no one responded. No one sat next to her. Because the vines weren't just physical now, they had become a metaphor. They crept through policies, wound around silence, bloomed in the cracks of authority. I was the weed they tried to cut down, the unwanted growth, the nuisance. But I didn't die. I rooted deeper. And now, I'm everywhere. An email circulated, quiet at first, then quickly forwarded between residents. It included a redacted version of my deed and a link to an old federal conservation registry confirming my lot's status. Someone had checked. And then the rumors started. Whispers that the HOA had been enforcing fines illegally, that they had no grounds to restrict my compost, much less demand my eviction, that Catherine had failed to review the neighborhood's property classification boundaries. But that wasn't the worst of it. The Federal Registry also listed 3 protected environmental overlays within the community, including the greenbelt near the park where they'd been dumping my compost. Which meant they hadn't just overreached, they may have violated federal green space protections. And violations like that, they don't come with fines. They come with investigations. The panic was immediate. HOA group emails went silent. Contractors stopped showing up. One board member deleted their social media accounts entirely. Catherine tried one final play, an open letter accusing me of exploiting loopholes. But it fell flat. Her power wasn't just eroded, it had been composted. She had treated the rules like tools, bent them to punish, silence, control. But in the end, she never read the fine print. I did. And in that one overlooked line, buried like a seed, was everything I needed to grow back stronger than they ever imagined. Catherine resigned on a Wednesday. No speech, no apology, just a typed notice, posted to the HOA bulletin board, and sent as a PDF through the resident portal. 5 lines, 1 signature, gone. They said she cited personal stress and irreconcilable differences with the direction of the community. But the truth was printed in the county's final report. Unlawful fines, improper land use, violations of federal conservation protections. The HOA was slapped with a $35,000 environmental penalty and placed under external audit. All enforcement actions were suspended. Most of the board quietly stepped down. A few tried to hang on, but with Catherine gone, they folded faster than overwatered kale. For the first time in years, the neighborhood had room to breathe. In the months that followed, we held open nominations for a new board. And for the first time, no realtors, no developers, no one with an agenda beyond actually living here. Longtime residents ran, people who planted vegetables, not brochures, veterans, school teachers, retirees, people who knew the difference between a weed and a wildflower. I wasn't planning to run. Honestly, I thought I'd had enough politics for one lifetime. But then a knock came on my door. 3 of the new board members standing there with coffee and hopeful eyes. "We want to make things right," one of them said, "but we need your help." They offered me a role, community eco-advisor, a position they created from scratch. I said yes, with one condition. Where the clubhouse once stood, gutted, condemned, stripped to its bones, I wanted to build something new. Not another vinyl monument to artificial beauty, not a marble-floored meeting hall. I wanted a teaching garden, a space where compost wasn't shameful, where kids could learn about soil, seeds, pollinators, where fruit trees could grow alongside native herbs and rainwater catchment barrels stood proudly in the sun. It took months. Volunteers came in waves, neighbors who once ignored me now showing up with gloves and shovels. We cleared the invasive overgrowth together. We healed the soil with mulch and mycelium. We built beds from salvaged wood and trellises from old fencing. But we left one wall. Just one. The back wall of the old clubhouse, still upright, still solid, now wrapped completely in morning glory. It blooms every morning, wild and purple, like a soft rebellion. I had the board install a small plaque beneath it. Let things grow where others tried to bury them. Now, children run between beds of lavender and sage. Seniors plant tomatoes and swap cuttings. A sign reads, "The Living Commons." And every spring, we host a community seed exchange. People bring jars, stories, memories. Compost is no longer whispered about, it's celebrated. Sometimes people still call me Mulchman. But now they do it with a smile. Some ask me questions, others bring me coffee as I work. No one throws trash over my fence anymore. I walk by the garden often. I never make a big deal of it. I just watch. Watch the way roots push upward even through cracked concrete. Watch how quickly the forgotten can flourish when given the chance. They stole my compost. They called me a nuisance. They tried to turn my garden into a crime scene. But in the end, they only gave me space to grow something bigger. Not just a garden. Not just flowers. A future. And this time, the roots are everywhere. Think that was wild? This was just one garden in one neighborhood. Wait till you hear what happened when a retired lawyer found a hidden clause in his HOA bylaws. The real war isn't over lawns, it's over who gets to make the rules. Because when you read the fine print, you don't just protect your home. You plant the kind of justice that spreads